This is Chapter 9, Part 1, the muscular system. We're going to talk about histology and the physiology related to muscles. So to start off with, we'll just kind of give you an overview of types of muscle tissue. We have skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, and cardiac muscle, as you learned when we covered tissues in the beginning of the semester. Skeletal muscle is responsible for movement, locomotion, facial expressions, posture, respiratory movements, and other types of body movement. And of course, skeletal muscle is voluntary, as in we need to think about it in order to do it. Smooth muscle is found in the walls of hollow organs, in blood vessels, in the eyes, glands, skin. Some functions for smooth muscle include propelling urine, mixing food in the digestive tract, dilating and constricting pupils, and regulating blood flow. This is involuntary, so it happens without our conscious knowledge. Cardiac muscle is in the heart, and it's the major source of the movement of blood. And of course, this also is involuntary, so we are not conscious of that. So functions of the muscular system, kind of a quick overview: movement, maintenance of posture, respiration, production of body heat, communication, constriction of organs and vessels, and contraction of the heart. So general properties of muscle tissue, these four main properties are things that muscle tissue can do. Muscle tissue is able to contract. Muscle tissue is excitable. Muscle tissue is able to extend or has the ability to stretch. And then muscle tissue is able to recoil and go back to its original position by being elastic. So the anatomy of skeletal muscle, I want to kind of point out first the connective tissue coverings, abbreviated with a CT, as in connective tissue. So anytime you see CT, replace that with connective tissue. So the epimysium, the perimysium, the endomysium. The epimysium surrounds the whole muscle. So it surrounds the muscle, all the fascicles are kind of bundled together, and the epimysium then covers that. The perimysium surrounds each individual fascicle, and a fascicle is a bundle or a grouping of muscle cells. The endomysium, endo meaning within, surrounds the individual muscle fibers. And keep in mind that muscle fiber is the same as a muscle cell, and a muscle cell is a muscle fiber. Those terms are interchangeable. So muscle cell is a muscle fiber. So the endomysium surrounds the individual muscle cells or muscle fibers that are found in each of those fascicles. Collagen from the connective tissue layers merge to form tendons. And those actually those give the attachment to the bone. All right, motor neurons are what stimulates skeletal muscle to contract. So skeletal muscle isn't going to contract on its own. It has to have some sort of message or stimulus. And that comes from the motor neurons that we're going to learn about here in a couple of minutes, because we're going to talk about the neuromuscular junction. So each motor neuron controls more than one muscle cells or muscle fibers. Remember, muscle fiber is a muscle cell. So this is the first picture you're going to see here on a whole muscle, and they show kind of a cutaway so you can see the individual parts. And we're going to go over this as we move forward. You will have to label parts of this, not every single one of these parts, but the majority of what's in this picture you're going to have to label. So skeletal muscle fiber anatomy. So the muscle cells develop from the fusion of myoblasts and that results in large multinucleated muscle cells. They have a striated appearance, and you remember that from going over the skeletal muscle in tissues. And those striated or stripes that appear on the muscle surface has to do with the physical anatomy, or the anatomy, not the physical, but the anatomy of the skeletal muscle itself. So the number of fibers remain pretty constant after birth, but muscles do get larger, and they refer to that as hypertrophy of the muscle fibers, because they become larger and more developed through use. General histology of muscle fibers, and again, remember, muscle fibers are the cells of the muscle cells. So the electrical component structures can respond to and transmit electrical signals. They include the following. So these listed here are the electrical components of the muscle fibers. We have the sarcolemma, which is the plasma membrane of the muscle cell. And the sarcolemma surrounds the sarcoplasm, which is the cytoplasm and other contents of the cell. Transverse tubules are basically an extension of the sarcolemma. So the transverse tubules are an extension of the sarcolemma, and they fold down into the cell. And I think of the transverse tubules as kind of, if you throw a sheet over your couch and you tuck it down in between the cushions, that's what the transverse tubules are doing. They're going down deep into the couch or into the cell itself. So the transverse tubules, or T-tubules, are inward folds of the sarcolemma. So they're an extension of that sarcolemma pushed down into the cell, and they project into the interior of the muscle cell. The sarcoplasmic reticulum is specialized smooth endoplasmic reticulum, and this is important. This is where the calcium of the muscles is stored. So calcium is stored in the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Enlarged portions of the sarcoplasmic reticulum are called terminal cisternae, and they lie adjacent to the T-tubules, so kind of on either side. So the two terminal cisternae and their associated T-tubule form what is called a triad. So before I move forward, I want to make sure that everybody understands that it is really important to know where all these parts are and their functions as we move forward and we talk about muscle contraction, because knowing what each part is responsible for will make it a little bit easier. So this picture of a triad, I just pulled this off of the internet because this is a better picture of the triad, and the book doesn't really have a very good one that I like. But this picture illustrates the sarcolemma, which is the plasma membrane. And remember, the plasma membrane, or the sarcolemma in this case, is the border of the cell. It's the outline of the cell. It holds all the contents inside. And then this kind of woven sweater-like, Afghan-like design here is the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And you can see that the sarcoplasmic reticulum has these bulges here and here in the same color. And the terminal, and those are called the terminal cistern. And then the T-tubules, which are like if you poked a piece of that sarcolemma down into the cell, that would be the T-tubule all the way down in the cell. It's these networks of an extension of the sarcolemma that go down deep into the cell that allow later, that we'll talk about, that allows for any kind of signal to travel down deep into the cell. So the triad is the T-tubule and the two terminal cisternae together. Okay, and that's just a name they call those. There's nothing specific that you need to know, other than the triad is made up of the T-tubule and the two terminal cisternae. All right. So we're going to stop there and we're going to pick up on part 2.